what we wanted to do in this panel, and I'll introduce the panel very quickly, was not only talk about the exponential technology and adoption in banks, but also really talk about what's real today. What are the challenges in banks and financial services overall? And what are the constraints as well? So there are some real-life examples that our panelists are going to talk about today. Very briefly, going from to my right, Jeff Kuhn, Adelyn Zhou, and Peter Spenser. Jeff is an EVP at Bank of New York Mellon. Bank of New York Mellon today is the largest custody bank. It has over $30 trillion in assets under custody. Jeff has led a lot of innovative programs in using cognitive machine learning in his shop that are real today. And Jeff's going to talk a little bit about that. Adelyn Zhou is Chief Marketing Officer, and she is at TopBots. Which is a leading research and strategy firm focused on educating and advising Fortune 500 companies, specifically on AI and bot technologies. And she's going to talk about, from her perspective, from a research as well as from a strategic advisor perspective, what's going on in the marketplace. And last but not least, Peter Spenser, who is a board member, advisor to a number of startups, as well as technology companies, one of which is Temenos, a very large, over 2,000 customer technology firm to financial services overall. Prior to that, Peter also led within Deloitte the analytics and cognitive offerings, so he's served clients in a number of areas. So very distinctive perspectives in a bank, advisor, research overall. I am the moderator. My name is Sridhar Rajan, and I lead the robotic cognitive offering within Deloitte Consulting. So with that as a background, let's dive right in. It's half an hour. Hopefully, it'll be an engaging dialogue. With the first question, Jeff, to you, more around an exponential, maybe even a broad question before we dive into what is real today. Where do you see, from an institutional banking perspective, the financial services industry headed in 5 to 10 years, especially in adoption of these technologies?
Sure. You know, 10 years is a long time, so I'll stick to the 5-year time frame right this second. But I think, you know, with all the respect to the prior speaker, which is a tremendous vision from our perspective in big institutional banks, it's more around the adoption of technology. Certainly, we're very, very focused on digitization, on making on trying to extrapolate our clients' behaviors based on the digital patterns of managing liquidity. But a lot of it is focused really on how do you adopt and now implement the technologies that we've been working with. And those can range from much broader implementation of workflow technologies, machine learning types of technologies. I'm going to talk a little bit later about a major program we've implemented around machine learning that really saves us tremendous amounts of money. How do you drive expense, lead efficiency, reduce risk, improve the client experience? Those are the types of things that we're going to be introducing into the bank, where in the past we might have been, in the past couple of years ago, we might have been more worried about whether or not Apple or Google is going to become the next big giant competitor. I'm not sure that they want to actually embrace the regulatory environment that the big banks have to institutionally have to deal with. So I think it's more around adoption versus disruption at this point for institutional banking.
And Adelyn, from your perspective, obviously you've dealt with a lot of firms. You've obviously researched and analyzed stuff as well. What is your view? Where is bank and where is a financial services firm headed, given we have been in the past one of the largest adopters of automation, of digitization, of really some of the newer technologies as well? What's different about this?
Well, taking a step back, a lot of companies in the financial industry are first having to get all their data, and banks and financial institutions are at one of the best poised to use AI and machine learning. I mean, no other industry has as much data as we do in the financial sector. So many companies I've seen, for example, Visa, started really getting their data house in order, for example, 5 years ago. That's when they started a division or a team that was focused exclusively on collecting their data and becoming a center of excellence for the different departments. And now that team has grown to 80 people, and that capability can be called upon by the various different divisions. So then the regulatory division or the cybersecurity division, all of them start calling onto this data set that has been cleaned and trained over time so that they can start improving and using machine learning in the other different sectors of their business. Another more tangible consumer side of applications I've seen in AI is everyone's talking about bots. Bots, as we fundamentally know them, may or may not be artificially intelligent or smart. A lot of times, they can be just dumb pipes in decision trees, right? We've all been on the other end of a customer service experience where the bot just keeps on asking us the exact same question. We're like, finally, human, please. But a lot of times, though, those are just the precursors. Right. And we're seeing, especially if you're touching consumers on the banking side, a lot of potential. Customer service for banks is a huge cost center as well. It costs anywhere from $5 to $25 or more to service every customer support ticket. That's huge savings because if you can cut those down with using an intelligent agent, or a lot of times, these times, it's cyborg model, where an agent plus cognitive AI solutions, you can now actually increase your revenues without increasing your costs and customer care. So I've seen a lot of banks moving that direction on the consumer side. Companies like TD Ameritrade has a bot. Bank of America announced one months ago, so we have yet to see it. Capital One, super innovative this space. They have Alexa Skill SMS bot on their
We have bots.
thing. You guys have a bot, exactly. So it's so many.
We have several hundred, yeah.
Yeah.
And Peter, you've played both on the demand side in helping clients through adoption of some technology, and now you're on the supply side and looking at a number of technology firms as well. What's your perspective? Does this feel different to yesterday and the day before in terms of exponentials, and what do you see 4 or 5 years out?
Yeah, and just starting with that last question, does it feel different from yesterday? Right. Or even, say, 15 years ago, the dot-com and the e-business? Because I think there are analogies to that transformation we went to. I think it is different because it's more real, but on the other hand, there's also certain attributes, which I'll get to in a second, which feel the same in terms of a plethora of startups, fintechs, others, a huge number. A lot of which have some great technology, great ideas, but crappy business. Well, that's questionable business model. And sorry, I need to be more polite. But business models which are not sustainable, and I think they will be a shakeout. But getting back to, I guess, the more kind of your first question, in fact, which is 10 years out, 5 years out, and I can't think out 3 weeks most of the time. So I won't put a time frame. And I think our previous speaker, in terms of a vision, outlined a compelling vision. I think a lot of that makes huge sense. The question with all these things is timing. So when do we get there? I mean, if you think about what are the forces, technology clearly critical one and probably a large part of this conference. But regulatory is there, will remain to be there, and the regulatory forces have an impact on what can be done and the timing around it. Demographics, I think, have also been talked about in terms of changing behaviors, expectations, and so on. So trying to predict, to me, is very hard. So I will just take an example in retail banking. I've spent a fair bit of time over in Europe, says the Brit. I spent a fair bit of time over there in my current role, and they're talking, the banking community there is talking about a regulatory or an EU mandate called PSD2. PSD2 is basically saying customers own the data, and therefore banks need to make that data available, as long as the customer gives consent, to third parties. So as you follow that along, well, that means the banks now, by next year, have to provide a set of APIs so that third parties can access client data which is sitting in the bank, with the banks. That really has significant implications for third-party providers, be they fintechs, be they Google, Apple, whoever. They can basically take the customer management relationship, the front office-y kind of things. They've got full access to data, again, given client-customer consent. So they can add value added, they can add services, they can do huge amounts with it. And this leads back to the cognitive, all that comes with cognitive, RPA, all these technologies. But you need data, right? So once the open banking takes root, it changes the landscape. So I think, at least in Europe, where this is started, I think what we'll see is the models will change. You'll end up with some banks which may just be like utilities. They have banking products, they're highly regulated, it may be commoditized. They just provide, let's call it the back end in a crude sense. Then you'll have these third-party providers, which are like distributors, value adds, and there can be a plethora of those which work on that. So you've got two different kind of models there. And a third model is what we would call pure, true digital banks, which have open banking, but which were built from grounds up as a digital bank in terms of the processes, the technology, and so on. So I think in terms of transforming, I don't know what 5 years, 10 years out will look like for anything. But I think in Europe, at least, you can kind of see how that interplay between the technology and the regulatory could lead you to a picture like that.
Right. And we're seeing some evidence of that in the ground today as well, right? Especially on the retail side, where you have customer or client onboarding, which used to take 4 weeks, is now down to 3 days in some cases. Lemonade, which is a very public insurance example, where you're settling a claim again in a matter of 4 or 5 weeks in seconds. The problem of the business proposition or the client proposition seems to be fundamentally different, and the only way to solve that is through adopting some of these newer technologies as well, right? One of the forces that, and you talked about forces, Peter, a little bit, and Jeff, let me ask you this question. One of the forces in this rise of adoption of machine learning cognitive was this explosion in unstructured data, right? In dealing with contracts, invoices, texts, and a variety of non-structured information to actually make some analysis of it. And when you and I were talking about it, you mentioned a very relevant case example in your adoption in cognitive machine learning around solving this unstructured data problem. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about that and talk about what's really real today and what's kind of helped that grow?
So we're the largest institutional sort of processing and servicing bank, and we have thousands and thousands of clients over the history of the bank. So we have every contract variation you can imagine in multiple languages, in different tenures, across different legal entities, et cetera. And this initiated with the regulatory requirement around resolution and recovery, where the regulators basically, if we were to go into resolution, want to understand what are the potential contractual exposures that the bank has to its clients. And it lays out a whole series of different types of what defines contractual exposures. So we actually engaged with a relatively young machine learning software company, and we're using their software to, we digitize every single contract now. We ingest the contract into the software. We apply rules, and those rules can get better as you use the product. So the first pass through, you might be looking for downgrades or key terms or paragraphs that define certain contractual responsibilities. And as you look through the contracts, you improve the rules, and therefore its level of accuracy might even go from like 50 to 80% or 90% in terms of being able to identify that information in the specific contracts. And we didn't actually centralize all of the contract repositories, but we took an image of every single contract and applied these rules to it. We have now over 1 million documents that we're applying to this rule set with this software. And initially, a very expensive project to comply with regulation. But recently, there was an issue around looking at outsourcing requirements. What are our clients' requirements and that we have in contracts related to how we outsource business to other legal entities of the bank? What might have taken weeks, months, and have a very low accuracy level, took 6 hours for us to write the rules and scan our entire universe of contracts. and have an opinion around this particular question. So we've really taken what is a completely paper-based, moved it to digital, moved it to sophisticated OCR and ICR capability with machine learning, and have now a fantastic tool that we can actually use to mine the data that's in our contracts, not, even for revenue purposes. So really, really valuable implementation.
Right. So I mean, there's some common themes that is part of the offering of the proposition, Jeff, you talked about, and that is, how do I significantly, I should use the word exponentially, improve the proposition to my client or customer? In this case, that's the regulator. Can I respond back in hours rather than weeks, et cetera, et cetera? Adelyn, Peter, are you seeing forces or drivers or really exponential business value coming out today in the marketplace through adoption of technology and others to just fundamentally say, why does it take this long to be able to do something for my customer or my client, and can I reduce that by 80, 90, 100%, or improve quality 80, 90, 100%, given some of the financial services constraint? We've got to be accurate, we can't afford to make errors, and so on and so forth.
Just to kind of answer that, I think, what I'm saying, and again, this is no new news, but as with the case of innovative technology, innovation generally, but certainly in technology, there's new business models, new products and services which can get driven, things that we can't even envisage today, we can do, and so there's this whole kind of new business model, new services thing. In addition, there is doing what we currently do today more efficiently, at greater speed, at greater scale, and so on. I think from what I've seen in a lot of the financial services, there's been more of, let's call it that, meaning the speeding up, quickly cutting costs, doing things more efficiently. In terms of new business models, we've certainly seen some. Not a whole lot, and I think, again, the previous speaker showed a vision of some of what's to come. In terms of what's real and what I've seen, like probably most of the folks here who've worked in financial services, certainly on the retail side, be that retail banking or even wealth management, retail brokerage, there has been a lot of absorption of analytics, advanced analytics, leading into cognitive, leading into machine learning, and so on. The ability to, I think it's best called customer intimacy at scale, so that the chat boxes, the natural language processing. I mean, there's a lot of almost like point solutions which are in place. And I think, and Jeff, you can probably talk to this from your point of view, through doing, let's call them tactical point solutions, a lot of the larger institutions are getting more comfortable and building capabilities. Right. They're not necessarily going to do something which is completely transformational, and maybe the question of disruption still is out there, but I think by hitting the low-hanging fruit, by showing a real return, because most institutions do look for a business case, right. We are seeing adoption. And again, we can talk about the retail, and I've mentioned some of those things, but I've seen it also in capital markets, seen it, in wealth management, robo-advisors, which I don't think are particularly examples of cognitive, because they're really more templated investing, but they're highly automated and use, let's call them, newer technology. I think there's still a ton of potential in wealth management, in particular, around true cognitive. What we're seeing today, I think, is just kind of maybe the lead into it.
Adelyn?
A couple points I wanted to highlight.
Yep.
One, you talked about having to invest a lot before having the system that where you were able to do 6 hours and come up with the answer. Right. So that is definitely something that we see. Also, I mentioned earlier, large companies, you have to get your data together. And so it does take a substantial investment of time, effort, and dedication that we are going to do this for the long term. So that's one point. The second thing that I have seen is a lot of times it's one single problem that a vendor is brought in for or a solution is brought in for. And for your problem, that problem was understanding all the different contracts. There's so many parts of a business in financial institutions. You can use AI, Exponential in any part. But what I've seen most successful is one champion within the institution finding one problem or finding something that they can iterate better on and being that one champion for it throughout the bank. And then once they bring on the pilot, once it seems to work, then do I see it get distributed across. I mean, we're all pretty I would say risk averse, right? If it's working, why change it? We have so many regulatory oversights on us. So therefore, I see it mostly taking a big investment, taking an internal champion, believing in the long term, and then putting it throughout the bank.
Let me pick up on one of the points you mentioned, right? The risk averseness point. Financial services has been heavily regulated, and rightfully so. It's also one of the highest or the most demanding sector in terms of accuracy and getting things right because of the implications of not getting it wrong. The examples that all three of you talked about have typically involved newer technologies, smaller firms that are in some way experimental in their capabilities in adoption to a particular problem. It feels like that is forcing financial services firms to develop new muscles almost, right? So what do you see large firms especially, and assuming disruptors are not going to completely disrupt it out, adopting these kind of exponential technologies in terms of new skill set, new muscles, new capabilities? What is changing tomorrow that you actually bring in today? And let me, and again, open it up to the panel, but Jeff, you want to go first?
I mean, I think, look, because of the security issues, because of the role that we play in financial markets around the world, we will partner very cautiously with other firms, big or small. But certainly, if it's a larger firm, there's certain assumptions going into it that you have the appropriate care and controls and structure within that large firm. In this particular case, we might partner with a smaller firm that is a software firm, but we're not going to run any data through that firm. We'll have control of source code. We'll have control of when new releases of an application get rolled into production through our testing environment. So we kind of bootstrap smaller firms' solutions to the controls within the company. If you look at one of the topics that also the prior speaker spoke about, which is KYC, that I know a lot about, you know, we might think about what are the solutions that small firms are coming up with, but our preference would actually be part of a consortium, and we work with the consortiums that are out there for institutional KYC, and ultimately envision a consortium being the provider, because the regulators, first of all, are holding each bank liable for the responsibility of KYC, even if you use a third party, and we're providing a lot of our clients' data to these consortiums, and so therefore we're very concerned about the security around that. So we think of every firm we partner with through a very, very rigorous third-party vendor review process that gets reviewed on an annual basis, or even more frequently if the services change or if the company changes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sorry,
if
go
I
ahead,
could...
and then we'll end, Adelyn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Peter, and then we'll end with Adelyn.
Okay, so let me just illustrate by one of the things you mentioned. I'm on the board of Temenos, and it's going to sound like an ad. It's not meant to be, so apologies. They're a big core banking and wealth management software provider, and have, I think, a pretty well architected system. What they've done is built what they call a marketplace. They've opened up APIs and work explicitly with fintechs, so that there is a marketplace of fintechs, which is part of the ecosystem provided by Temenos for their clients. So that opens up that. In addition, from a bank's point of view, some banks, when it comes to their core banking, are trying to renovate, and they'll talk to a Temenos or a competitor to Temenos about doing that. But what I've also seen, and I think this is an interesting way to go, is we can't do that. We can't move quickly enough. It's not going to happen. And so some banks will say, you know, we will do a pure digital bank. We will open a pure digital bank, brand it completely differently. Bank Leumi in Israel have done this. They've gone live with something called Pepper. It's a pure digital bank, and they came to Temenos, and Temenos has a digital bank product. They use that, and over time, that bank grows, and that one shrinks. So there's two different strategies there. One is renovate, rebuild within. It's like moving the proverbial battleship, right, in motion. Second is we don't really touch that too much, but we build a new one and build that one up and that one shrinks. So there's a couple of different macro level business strategies that are played.
And Adelyn, turn the final word over to you.
As you mentioned, a lot of these upstarts or companies are new companies in the fintech space that have the OCRs, the NLP languages, the detection. And so, of course, they're small companies. They might not always have their systems in place. And so what I've seen is the sales cycles for a company selling into a large financial institution can sometimes be from a year to up to 2 years. So if you're a financial institution looking to partner, you might need to start talking to companies and anticipate that these are going to be implementations you do 2 years from now. To speed up this onerous process, right, which is needed. A lot of banks, for example, even Bank of America, have implemented a new procurement system where they focus a dedicated amount of resources from their procurement team to helping these upstart technologies go through their procurement process faster. So they have dedicated calls with legal counsel that are used to working with startups and large banks. They have dedicated team members and people to help usher through a project so that if a company is looking to use these technologies, that it doesn't, the team doesn't have to wait years before these companies pass through all the regulatory hurdles.
Right. So I think we're coming right at the edge of the time, so let me try to summarize kind of what we heard a little bit. What I heard from the panelists was, one, financial services firms, certainly banks, do believe that in the future, to be defined, the adoption of these exponential technologies is going to grow at a rapid pace. It's being driven by exponential business benefits, and the technology is being used for that. Some examples that you quoted around retail and institutions driving that. I also heard that the entry point for the more complicated machine learning cognitive is a point problem. It's not a large-scale industrial strength solution. It's, I have a problem like a regulatory example, we're solving that problem overall, and that's where things are, right? And also heard today that there are a lot of constraints that prevent you from mass adopting that, and you're trying to work on a longer-term vision to get around that overall as well, right? One final question, if I can, to the group. For folks who are looking from financial institutions or banking perspective to build this capability, what would your recommendation be to start? Because it's hard to get away from the BAU perspective, and there's an engine that's running overall, and we've heard other speakers talk about how exponential adoption typically requires almost a different construct outside of a BAU structure, which is very, very hard for a financial institution to do.
Yeah.
So how do you think about this entry point to say, you know what, I know this is needed, this is how we get started, and I'll open it up again.
So the observation around Bank Leumi, if you read or listen to like a Clay Christensen from Harvard, you can't change big companies from within, because it's kind of like there's a cancer and then all the antibodies prevent it and drown the innovation. I think that's a challenge certainly in the banks that I've worked in. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So we do take point solutions, and there's a couple things, because I've been responsible for a lot of big change-oriented projects. And so to me, the key is that you have identified specific resources. You have a problem. The problem is either a regulatory one, or other examples, there might be a massive operational problem. We're failing on X% of trades. How do we actually look at the issues that are happening based on studying the data? Or how do we have an efficiency solution with workflow so that if an email comes in unstructured that says, I have a problem with my corporate action, it automatically gets routed to the corporate action group. So we either take a regulatory or an efficiency problem, we target it, we box around it, and we actually make sure that there's a defined team that includes program management resources, subject matter experts, lawyers, compliance people. So we got to show that issue the love, basically, to address it effectively.
Any final thoughts, comments on kind of where this is headed? Adelyn first, and then you, Peter?
So if you're a senior member and an executive team, I would recommend getting your data and hiring even a chief AI officer. Yes, that is a term these days now. If you're not in that position.
Talk to you about how that differs from a chief data officer.
Right.
But
yeah. And if you're not in that kind of role and you're head of a business unit or your own department, we've mentioned multiple times data being the oil of everything exponential. Make sure that you have the data within your regulatory department collected. You have the 1 million different documents organized. Having a data warehouse or system, depending on whatever type of system you're working on, so that when it comes time to implement one of these solutions, you at least have that oil ready to fuel whatever growth you need.
Great. And Peter?
I don't have anything incremental to add. I agree with both of the previous speakers. On a personal level, personally, I found the course on machine learning from Coursera, Andrew Ng, I'm sure some of you out there done that, to be that's a purely personal recommendation at the individual level. How do you get your head around some of the machine learning and cognitive concepts?
Right.
But institutionally, I agree with these two.
Fantastic. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of an experiential challenges and the learnings that are going on as well. On behalf of the panelists, wanted to thank all of you for being part of this session. And thank you to the panelists.